Part 2. Burke and Society. In the TV series Blackadder, Edmund Blackadder, Prince George's devious butler, has put his idiotic sidekick, Baldric, forward as a candidate for election in a rotten borough. He is interviewed by an ever so slightly anachronistic BBC political correspondent, who was told by Blackadder that we in the Adder Party are going to fight this campaign on issues, not personalities. The interviewer asks why this is so, only to be blandly informed that it is because our candidate doesn't have a personality. In a similar way, much of the problem with trying to come to terms with Burke's political philosophy arises from the fact that he doesn't seem to have a political philosophy, or at least not one that can simply be located in a treatise or text, since Burke has no treatise on political philosophy, with the exception of the Vindication. What political philosophy he has must be gleaned from various passages in his voluminous writings. Truth to tell, Burke's theory is more of an anti-theory, his ideology more of an anti-ideology. He is commonly taken to reject abstruse metaphysical reasoning about politics, in particular certain accounts of the centrality of reason, in favour of instinct and history. And even if this claim is something of an exaggeration, it is hard to deny its fundamental accuracy. Like Adam Smith, however, I think it might be fair to characterise Burke as not so much denying reason a place in politics, but as denying a certain abstract and detached and ahistorical view of reason that place. In his Reflections on the Revolution in France, Burke famously remarks that we are afraid to put men to live and trade each on his own private stock of reason, because we suspect that this stock in each man is small, and that the individuals would do better to avail themselves of the general bank and capital of nations and of ages. As was the case with Hume, Burke has no interest in speculating about the origins of society or the state, still less in drawing conclusions from any such conjectural history. He starts with the here and the now. Man is an inherently social being, living in and through society. Society is not simply an assemblage of individuals, but is permeated by institutions of various kinds, which institutions constrain, compete, and cooperate with each other, contextualize and shape people's lives, and act as repositories of artistic, technical, social, and political knowledge. In a way that anticipates themes that will become known to us from the writings of Hayek many years later, Burke believes that society is not the outcome of some grand design or some overall plan. It is rather the evolutionary resultant of how people have lived their lives in community over many years, the decisions they have made individually and in community, the laws that have emerged to regulate their lives together, and the means they have devised to further their ends. A people is not just a mass of individuals, it is a corporation, an artificial body, in which there are distinct and different, yet cooperating parts. Society, at bottom, depends upon attachments that precede reason and calculation, such as love of one's family and locality, and other attachments that radiate outwards from there into one's country and one's nation. Such attachments are constitutive of one's being. They are not chosen arbitrarily. At bottom, writes Sabine, these feelings are instinctive. They make up the massive substructure of human personality, in comparison with which reason and self-interest are superficial. At the foundation of society and morals is the need that every man feels to be part of something larger and more enduring than his own ephemeral existence. For Burke, society is not a product of reason alone. It depends, rather, on instinct and obscure propensities, even on what Burke defiantly calls prejudices, by which he means judgments in advance of reason, not necessarily judgments opposed to reason. Prejudice, writes Mansfield, is not opposed to reason, but allied with it. Prejudice supplies the untaught, natural feelings that give permanence to reason. Burke's frank recognition that politics is inseparable from prejudice, that society can never be rational and enlightened, reminds one of Aristotle. But his confidence that prejudice contains sufficient latent wisdom does not. For Aristotle, latent wisdom indeed exists in political opinion, but not in the uncontradicted seclusion that Burke seems to suppose. Prejudices are a form of prejudgment in conformity with long-established customs or traditions. Prejudice is the repository of latent wisdom. The moral virtues trump the intellectual virtues. In particular, prudence, practical wisdom, trumps theoretical science, should the two conflict. If you remove reason and natural law as the foundation of society, you are left with a vacuum that must be filled. Burke filled it with tradition and the elevation of the community in place of the individual. Use, long continued, gives title to property, even should there be no knowledge of the circumstances of its original acquisition. As applied to government, it means that a government in place need show no justification for its continuation, so long as no other government with a greater title should appear. The notion of prescription, which is central to Burke's thought, is taken from Roman law. Prescription means that what matters in respect of property is that it be handed on by a train of succession. What the situation was with respect to its original acquisition is not really important. A scheme of government must be presumed to be in order if the people governed by it have been so for long and have flourished under it. Bush's thesis is that Burke consciously tried to steer a path between utilitarian pragmatism and the absolutism of natural law by developing a view of the civil social person who was neither motivated wholly by self-interest nor dependent upon an otherworldly criterion of conduct, neglectful of his or her interests. Burke's emphasis upon prejudice, presumption, and prescription provides the basis for anchoring morality and political obligation to the collective wisdom of a community, and not to empirical rational calculation or abstract principles. There can be no doubt that Burke's conception of society is quasi-organic. Society grows and changes organically. Any sudden and complete reconstruction is likely to leave the patient dead, while the operation may be successful. The moral dimension of human existence, then, is not a product of reason, but rather of custom, tradition, and membership in a particular society. Man is truly human only in and through his social embeddedness. There is much in what Burke says. We are constituted in large part by things outside our range of choice. Our language, our family, and our locality. All of these are simply given to us, whether we will or not. Does a libertarian have to deny any of this? I don't think so. And a libertarian can accept, to a large extent, the presumptive legitimacy of existing structures, but without conceding any inviolable status to such structures. And a libertarian can be a gradualist in respect of change, albeit a rapid gradualist. Such is the complexity of existing institutions that any immediate radical change is likely to be widely destructive and, in fact, inimical to a coherent and improved restructuring. Burke held that the functional balance in the British Constitution of King, Lords and Commons is justified not by appeal to any grand theory, but simply by prescription. In this, perhaps surprisingly, he finds himself on much the same ground as Hume, who also argued that social and political arrangements are largely conventional and are justified, if justification is needed, by custom and use. Just as the ultimate justification of property is prescription, not some abstract conception of title, so too the grounds of the Constitution is also prescription. Our Constitution is a prescriptive Constitution. It is a Constitution whose sole authority is that it has existed time out of mind. Prescription is the most solid of all title, not only to property, but which is to secure that property to government. It is a presumption in favour of any settled scheme of government against any untried project. The individual is foolish. The multitude, for the moment, is foolish when they act without deliberation. But the species is wise, and when time is given to it as a species, it always acts right. This is the wisdom of crowds with a vengeance. Politics for Burke is an art, not a science, and it requires prudence, experience, and a knowledge of human nature. While he agreed with Hume on the essentially conventional nature of society, he was inclined to regard some social conventions as more or less inviolable, among these being property, religion, and the frame of the British Constitution. The Constitution to which Burke was so attached was, in large part, a Whig invention, designed to limit the prerogative of the king. Burke's view of the British Constitution is not unlike the customary understanding of the common law. The common law is not a creature of statute made by a particular group of people on a wet Wednesday afternoon when they had nothing else to do, but the product of particular decisions honed and refined in the furnace of actual practice and detailed decision-making. It is not made up in advance, but elicited from the exigencies of disputes and the necessities of dispute resolution. Similarly, the British Constitution is not made up from scratch, but is a living and vital record of the political decisions and political arrangements that have been tried in the furnace of experience. According to McClelland, inheritance is the key idea to Burke's politics. Everyone in England, from the king downwards, has something valuable to hand on to his children. The king inherits his crown, the nobility its privileges, and the common people their rights and liberties. Each of these three instances of inheritance is consistent with, and indeed bolsters up, the others. Burke thought that manners mattered more than law, and even more than morals, inasmuch as both law and morals in large measure depend upon manners. In his first letter on a regicide peace, he writes, "Manners are of more importance than laws. Upon them, in a great measure, the laws depend. The law touches us but here and there, and now and then. Manners are what vex or soothe, corrupt or purify, exalt or debase, barbarize or refine us, by a constant, steady, uniform, insensible operation, like that of the air we breathe in. They give their whole form and colour to our lives. According to their quality, they aid morals, they supply them, or they totally destroy them." Among the harshest things he has to say of those who make up the new French regime is that they have systematically set about destroying manners and natural piety. I find myself in substantial agreement with Burke on this point. If we take, as is, I think, not unreasonable, manners to encompass all that is customary in society, then law and morals are phenomena emergent from such custom. We do not produce and maintain our manners primarily by some process of detached reason. They arise naturally in the context of social relations. Such judgment as they embody is a kind of pre-reflective judgment, what Burke calls prejudice. Manners, as prejudices, allow us to act swiftly and surely and rightly without the need for agonized reflection and reasoning. At the root of manners is the notion of restraint, of limitation, of delayed gratification, and its product is a kind of social capital, just as the product of fiscal delayed gratification and restraint is economic capital. Burke contrasts this form of ordered liberty with mere license, which is the freedom to do whatever one wants to do without regard to circumstances. Now, libertarianism is compatible with both Burkean liberty or with Burkean license. A libertarian can arrive at substantially the same conclusions as Burke, with this difference, that the restraints and limitations that channel our exercise of liberty must, with the exception of the restraint of actions aggressing against others, be self-imposed, self-accepted, and not imposed by the coercive power of law. Just how close the Burkean position is to that of a culturally conservative libertarian should be evident from that seminal passage on manners from the Letters on a Regicide Peace. Jesse Norman characterizes the differences between liberalism, in both its classical variety and its libertarian mode, and Burke's approach in the following way. Liberalism emphasizes the primacy of the individual. Burke emphasizes the importance of the social order. Liberalism sees freedom as the absence of impediments to the will. Burke sees freedom as ordered liberty. Liberalism believes above all in the power of reason. Burke believes in tradition, habit, and prejudice. Liberalism stresses universal principles. Burke stresses fact and circumstance. Liberalism is unimpressed by the past. Burke quarries it. Liberalism admires radical change. Burke detests it. The liberal will cannot be made the subject of duties. Burke insists upon them. We saw that behind Burke's idea of tradition and custom is the notion of collective wisdom, transcending that of the individual, and that this is not a million miles away from Rousseau's general will. But that is not the only respect in which the two supposedly diametrically opposed thinkers converge. Both also found a central place in their thinking for the emotions. Boucher remarks that Burke certainly subscribes to some notion of a general will when he suggests that the collective rationality of a people must account for much more than individual reason, which is often flawed and subject to the pressures of the moment. Burke held Rousseau in contempt and no doubt was genuine in holding this opinion. He saw Rousseau as the apostle of extreme individualism, as a man in the grip of an idea which, by jettisoning morals and law and manners, could not help but destroy society. He attacks Rousseau, describing him as a man who is a lover of his kind but a hater of his kindred, a Mrs. Jellyby avant la lettre, as it were. Yet Rousseau and Burke had more in common than might at first appear to be the case. For both men, society, the group, the whole, was of more importance than the individual. Similarly, while Burke and Hume appear to and do agree in their overall conservative tendencies, there are significant differences between them. Hume's cast of mind is essentially utilitarian and pragmatic. Burke, on the other hand, commended an attitude of reverence to the past and to tradition that Hume would have had no truck with. In the end, the philosopher who most resembles Burke is Hegel. Hegel attempts to give a systematic account of what in Burke is, at its best, inchoate and scattered. It is important always to bear in mind just how limited government was in Burke's time. This may be something that we know, but there is perhaps a tendency to forget it, and, anachronistically, to dress the government of the 18th century in 21st century clothes. The principal task of the government in Burke's time was the maintenance of public order, defence against threats from abroad, and the management of foreign affairs generally, and to some extent trade. Apart from the administration of the Poor Law, an Elizabethan invention made necessary by the suppression of the monasteries, government had no interest in the provision of welfare. Governments thus limited in their aims and ambitions fit well Michael Oakeshott's description of the proper function of government. He writes, "And the office of government is not to impose other beliefs and activities upon its subjects, not to tutor or to educate them, not to make them better or happier in another way, not to direct them, to galvanize them into action, to lead them, or to coordinate their activities so that no occasion of conflict shall occur. The function of government is merely to rule. The image of the ruler is the umpire whose business is to administer the rules of the game, or the chairman who governs the debate according to known rules, but does not himself participate in it.